Hallo alle sammen, og velkommen til månedens møte med Morten i oktober, der temaet er Israel som apartheidstat. Vi prøvde å ha dette møtet for en måned siden, men da var Facebook ikke så veldig samarbeidsvillig. Så da var det ikke hele Facebook nede, og da fikk vi ikke sendt live heller, så da måtte vi ombooke hele møtet. Men heldigvis så har vi fått to veldig gode innledere på plass her i dag for å snakke om Israel og deres apartheidregime. I tillegg så kommer vi til å snakke om en annen hendelse som skjedde nå ganske nylig. 22. oktober så erklærte det israelske forsvarsdepartementet 6 palestinske sivilorganisasjoner for å være terrororganisasjoner. Og det var organisasjonene Adamer, Prisoner Support and Human Rights Association. Det var den palestinske menneskerettighetsorganisasjonen Al-Haq. Det var Bisan Center for Research and Development. Det var Defense for Children International, Palestine. Det var The Union of Agricultural Work Committees, og det var Union of Palestinian Women's Committees. Disse organisasjonene ble altså erklært som terrororganisasjoner, med alt det medfører i forhold til overvåkning, i forhold til massearrestasjoner, ransakelser, vanskeligheter med å få midler, vanskeligheter med å få samarbeidet med utenlandske organisasjoner og så videre. Med oss i dag så har vi blant annet Line Khateeb fra Al-Haq, den palestinske menneskerettighetsorganisasjonen, og vi har Yellin fra B Tselem, som kommer til å snakke både om denne avgjørelsen fra 22. oktober, og også om Israel og deres apartheidregime. Men de snakker ikke norsk, så nå skal jeg skifte til engelsk. Okay, so I would like to introduce you to our great speakers of today. So, and I'm sorry for probably pronouncing your name completely wrong, Anna, but from Al-Haq we have Line Khateeb. And she is the researcher and advocacy officer from the Palestinian human rights organization Al-Haq. So welcome, Anna.
Welcome. Thank you for having me.
And also we have Yellin. He's the director of public outreach in the Israeli human rights organization B Tselem. So welcome, Roy.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for tuning in.
So what I was saying in the beginning, I was just welcoming people to the meeting and raising just the 2 topics that we will be discussing today. The apartheid regime that Israel is, the Israeli apartheid regime, and also the act of calling Al-Haq and the other organizations terrorist organizations. So I will give you the word first, Anna. So I will share your presentation and just let me know when you need to change the slide. So I'll take you out of the picture, Roy, and looking forward to hearing what you have to say, Anna.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, like you've mentioned in the introduction, we are these days in a bit of stress, and not quite a stress, but also showing that our work comes unnoticed as a human rights organization, together with other 5 Palestinian organizations. You mentioned their names. We were designated as organization having alleged links to a terrorist organization listed on the terrorist list. But of course, in the regard of this presentation, also about apartheid regime and apartheid in Palestinian context, is very crucial to remember that it's not only about one separate event or attack against this particular only 6 organization, but it's something continuous and long-term strategy, which is part of the maintaining and establishing the apartheid regime in Palestine and over Palestinian people. So if we can move to the next slide, just for those who if we can move forward. It's me.
Yeah, it's you. You have to change the slide. Sorry.
Okay, all this work for me. That's fine. Sorry. So yeah, as you know, those attacks, as I mentioned, those attacks are a long-term orchestrated campaign, which we were already seeing and experiencing in earlier days. In 2015 and 16, we were having several attacks on our General Director Shawan Jabarin, as well as our employees working in Europe. And of course, this is not only centered on Al-Haq, because previously in this year, also other organizations were closed, and their leaders like Shad Haoda are in arbitrary detention, arrests still. And we were very vocal to showing how unlawful this arbitrary detention is. And all those practices, that's why I'm starting with this, my presentation, are part of a regime of maintaining the dominance over Palestinian people and Palestinian civil society as being vocal for many years and acting on the international scene as advocates for human rights and Palestinian rights, like right to self-determination, and revealing also the crimes committed against Palestinian people all around in different places. That's why there are this in the center of this attack, and of course this is all based on a illegal implementation of Israeli anti-terrorism law, which very much provides sweeping catalog of extraordinary penalties for the leadership, management, and membership of organization that they would condemn as a terrorist organization. In this case, we are dealing with Palestinian human rights organization, human rights defenders, and they are and will, according to this law, they are at risk of, and we are at risk at arbitrary arrest, prosecution, and this should be considered as a prosecution, but also, as I said, as a long-term strategy against our work, which is basically based on evidence and international law, and it takes this political power and shows the political power of Israel and the asymmetry of power which we are dealing within the occupying colonial regime, which also is which part is also committing crime of apartheid. So starting from this very recent events, we are seeing, we are seeing now, I would like to move to the fact that we are also being very hopeful recently and seeing much more debate on the issue of apartheid, and I'm very happy to present today and to start this conversation, and I'm glad that it started also in Norway, and that there is a ongoing shift of discourse how we present situation in Palestine, because apartheid framework and applying it as well, seeing through apartheid normative framework the situation on the ground, it's allow us to definitely not to undermine any other complementary international law rules, standards, and frameworks, but it shows the very much roots of a cause of a situation we are dealing with. and this is colonial roots. And in a recent recognition of by the UN, by the UN in May 2021, we could see that addressing the root causes of violation of human rights in Palestine will be in the center of investigation of Commission of Inquiry, which will start this work now. And this we can also see as a part, reason probably why Israel start to even more push out Palestinian civil society and undermining their voices in order to undermine our work in total or even close our activities to not support such an investigation, which is not only a matter of what Palestinian once used for many years to describe the system of oppression and system of discrimination they are experiencing, but also it's very much mounting recognition of apartheid framework as something which should be applied and discussed in context of Palestine. And of course, we can mention several scholar and academic work, but I would like to just remind you about several very important milestones in this shift of the discourse and over this narratives on Palestine, and shifting towards or adopting into it the decolonial perspective as well apartheid framework. So in 2019, 8 Palestinian regional and international organizations, including Al-Haq, Badil, Palestinian Center for Human Rights, Al-Mizan Center for Human Rights, Adamir, the Civic Coalition for Palestinian Rights in Jerusalem, and Cairo Institute for Human Rights Studies, as well Habitat International Coalition. Those organizations submitted very comprehensive report to the UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination ahead of Israel's upcoming review in December 2019. And earlier there was, and in this report, we presented our analysis, and we continue this work from that continue in this coalition. And this year we will be having another upcoming report also published in that matter, pushing even more the analysis into depth and showing the root causes of the crime. But of course, it didn't happen in a vacuum. The 2017 report authored by Richard Falk and Vingilia Tilly for the ESQA, that was very groundbreaking academic and internationally recognized voice for showing how the apartheid crime should deal with Palestinian people as a whole, and showing the strategic fragmentation as a main maintaining method of this crime. And of course, not without continuation, there was we could see how in a recent year, thanks to the new reports from Gjestene, from B Tselem, which Roy, I'm sure will tell much more about this, and finally Human Rights Watch publishing their report on apartheid and crime of persecution in Palestine. And we are hoping for much more debate and discussion, which happens. But we know that it's not an easy topic. And of course, it is still very much debated, but we can see more and more authoritative legal analysis coming up and agreeing on a matter of recognition that apartheid as a framework, as it is defined in international law, can be applied in a situation of Palestine. What's very important in application of such a legal framework is the fact that it's also change of a normative framework, how we perceive struggle of Palestinian people and how we perceive Palestinian people as a whole. Very often in a way how we would describe the human rights violation, very often the fragmentation of the Palestinian people into occupied Palestinian territory, dealing separately with refugees, dealing separately with Palestinian within on both sides of Green Line in Israel, living in Israel proper, or in Gaza, or in the West Bank, or in Jerusalem. And what's interesting, the report by Richard Falk and Virginia Tilley actually pointed out that such a discourse, normalization of this fragmentation of Palestinian people and dealing with them like a separate subject, due to the de facto fragmentation and division by several applied policies and laws by Israel, which I will be talking later on. But the normalization in an international discourse that when we are speaking about Palestinians, we need to separate them into those different domains, somehow contributed to the lack of understanding or seeing the feasible or solution that would be agreeing with de facto rights to self-determination of Palestinians, which was also recognized by the international law and international mechanism. So what's very important, as I mentioned before, that the root causes of Israel's apartheid over Palestinian people is the settler colonialism. And apartheid is a crime settled and created within the context of colonialism. As we know, it was originally used by South African regime, which was basically a regime of racial discrimination of white settler minority. But it's important that in international law, the way how we are dealing with it, it is a crime recognized by the international law, prohibited by it, and also recognized as a crime against humanity, which puts an obligation on all the actors and international community to fight against it. So basically, as probably many of you know, during the Nakba, Palestinians were disseminated and 800,000 people were displaced. 531 Palestinian villages were destroyed and 15,000 Palestinians were killed in more than 70 massacres, as much as Palestinian Bureau of Statistics was presenting. Almost 2/3 of the Palestinian people become refugees. So that's why it's so important to seeing this as in a context of displacement and colonial struggle as well, and the fact that the right of return and those refugees are not separate political issue to debate, but is a matter of right approach and addressing it as a international and crime against humanity. So we can see that the system of discriminatory laws and policies was going hand in hand and creating the legal architecture of apartheid de facto. So we have and it was constituted in Israel. But going just very quickly to the definition of what we understand after crime of apartheid. So we have several sources in international law that prohibits the apartheid and the racial discrimination, including the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination from 1965. But due to the importance and struggle in South Africa, also the International Convention on the Suppression and Punishment of the Crime of Apartheid. In short, Apartheid Convention was also drafted and recognized apartheid as a crime against humanity in Rome Statute of International Criminal Court in 1998 as well. So definition of the crime of apartheid is complementary in both instruments, convention and the Rome Statute. We will look more closely and more closely to the Article 7 of Rome Statute, which shows the elements and the definition of international convention presents more even comprehensive definition, including inhumane acts, which are committed together in the context of must be in the context of institutional regime, of systematic oppression and domination by one racial group over any other racial group, with an intention of maintaining that regime. So having those three elements, we can differentiate between discriminatory acts, which are also against international law and should be fight. But this is what distinct in a crime of apartheid, that it has this intent of maintaining the regime, and it is institutionalized within the institutionalized regime. And of course, that's very important to maybe answer the question of each of those elements very quickly. So we would say that institutionalized regime started in 1948 when the series of law and policies aimed to institutionalize dispossession of Palestinian people and depriving them from the land, expropriating the Palestinian land, and in order to settle the Jewish majority and Jewish majority state of Israel. And core legislation to this regard includes the 1950 absentee property law that didn't allow for the expelled and Palestinians or those who fled in the result of Nakba, and those property has been transferred under the control of custodian for absentees property. Therefore, it's expropriated Palestinian land, and this is one of inhuman acts also mentioned in the definition of a crime of apartheid. On the contrary, in 1950, the law of return has been established, which allows only Jewish persons to immigrate to Israel and become its national, while the right to return has never been recognized for the Palestinian people who fled or were expelled, and they are continuously forcibly displaced from the places, even becoming second-time refugees, if we can create such a category. Those laws were, of course, later on supplemented by other legislations, like, for example, 1952 status law, which authorized the World Zionist Organization, the Jewish Agency, and other Zionist bodies, which were created in the beginning of 20th century, to establish Jewish majority or population in Mandate of Palestine or Palestine, and becoming quasi-governmental entities, very often connected to also and creating business enterprises, which later on were established for this enterprise to be profitable, and having also very direct connection to establishing settlement enterprise, which we are seeing these days, and which is also condemned as illegal in the international law and by European Union and by all in general consensus by international community. But on the other hand, we don't see really much of an actual measures and acts to dismantle this enterprise, which is in a core sense part of this regime. So that's why the part of this regime, because it's on one hand fuels and allows for benefiting from this dispossession and oppression over Palestinian people, and maintain and strengthen and maintain the regime. A very important aspect in this context is the strategic fragmentation I mentioned before. This means it's this fragmentation, strategic fragmentation, how we like to call it, it has several layers. It's a geographical, political. It's part of in the different moments of development of the situation happen to the land, to the people. But what's most important for this analysis is this fragmentation happened to the Palestinian people when they are divided into at least 4 domains or categories. And for example, at what we would call it, what I said also mentioned before, they are like Palestinian refugees living outside of the mandatory Palestine, Palestinians living in the territory that became Israel in 1948, Palestinians living in the occupied West Bank and Gaza, and Palestinians living in Jerusalem. So those all groups of Palestinians, being Palestinian people as a whole, they cannot meet, group, live together, or exercise any collective rights, in particular the right to self-determination, which was recognized by the international community. And the inhumane acts establish and maintain the apartheid regime, which Apartheid Convention gives us a whole range of those. One of those important elements is all the acts creating a coercive environment against one group of people, which is Palestinians, in a different sense. For example, blockade and closure of Gaza it would be seen as a collective punishment and creating such a coercive environment. Demolitions, which are making people, or zoning and discriminatory zoning and planning regime, which makes people not being able to enjoy any of the social, cultural, or political rights. So on one hand, we have a strategic fragmentation for the people to be dealt as a separate groups, to not enjoy, to not be able to work together, to not be able to collectively enjoy their rights, to also establish their political or any future or development. On the other hand, having them, and part of this, and each of this group deals with a different level and phases of such a dispossession and oppression, which is, for example, denial of residency, denial of right to return, ongoing forcible displacement due to the different policies on the ground. Once being established as an occupying power, or as a basically Israel being, as 2018 newest law on a Jewish state of Israel shows that only Jewish people have a right to self-determination in this way understood state. So inhumane acts of systematic oppression, they are on different layers, establishing this fragmentation. On the other hand, coercive environment, which makes hamper any meeting any of the human rights and rights of the Palestinian people. And this is ongoing process, and we cannot understand this process without looking into the Palestinian people as a whole, and also into this as a historical process started in Nakba. So I hope that I can go into some of the more detailed aspects of it, maybe in a further discussion, but want to exceed my time too much. What's important to take out from this analysis, we believe that what's very important that international community recognize their responsibility, that and recognize that Israel's discriminatory laws, policies, and practices, they are not playing separately. And those little instances of smear campaigns, arbitrary detention, demolitions, expulsion happening in Sheikh Jarrah, or Gaza blockade, that they are separate instances which doesn't have any common logic. Under international law, it could be we would say that it can be defined as a crime of apartheid. So, as a crime against humanity, it puts on the states and on the international community obligation to take effective steps to dismantle and eradicate apartheid, and including any measures, an effective measure of non-assistance in the maintaining of such a lawful situation, and bring also this to, in order to bring this unlawful situation to an end, we should consider all severing diplomatic, cultural, trade ties with a state committing this crime, which is Israel, and having this as a seeing it as a compliance with our obligation or international community obligation under international law. What's important is to consider also the Palestinian people as a whole and the right to return as a center aspect of creation and maintaining of this racial discrimination and oppression, and this debate also over application this framework in a Palestinian context. As well, important it's important to, of course, deal with different separate aspects of the crime, as well in total addressing the root causes and colonial root causes. So doesn't mean that any other aspects of advocacy, like seizing the construction of the illegal settlements, advocating for lifting the Gaza closure, advocating for stop allegation and smearing the Palestinian civil society. All of this comes together into combined efforts for working against unlawful situation and the crime of apartheid. For the broader solidarity movement, we are hoping that this mounting recognition and this debate will result in the end with the solidarity movement that would bring this situation to the end. And this movement should be very much focused on justice, accountability, and support for the Palestinian right of self-determination, and to recognize their voice as a most important aspect of these discussions, and not necessarily only the practice, the problematic aspects of these debates or differences between the analysis of or legal discussions. So I think that this is me for now. I would turn to our host, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I didn't see the chat, so I will now go through it and see if there is any questions for clarification.
Thank you very much, Anna, and thanks for a very nice presentation. I think we're going to go straight to Roy, and then we'll do the questions and the discussion. Some of the questions are in Norwegian, so I'll try to translate them afterwards. But thank you very, very much. I'll give you a break now, Anna, take you out of the screen, and I will bring Roy in. So, Roy, I will just, I gave you an introduction before, so I'll just give the floor to you, and looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Okay, so I don't want to repeat a lot of the things that Anna just mentioned, because a lot of her analysis is something which is also detailed in our in our position paper that was published this year on January. But I do want to walk you through the reasonings that brought B Tselem, that for many years spoke about occupation, to change the paradigm and to start talking about apartheid. And I think the main thrust, or the main thing that is important to look in this shift of paradigm, is not is to look at the fact that in the entire area between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, there is one regime. And you cannot separate what goes on in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip from what happens in Israel proper. There is just one government sitting in Jerusalem, elected by only part of the population, by half of the population that resides between the Jordan River and the sea, but it makes the decision about for everyone, including Palestinians that are living outside of that area. And after B Tselem was established 10 years after our colleagues from Al-Haq, we were in 1989, and in the beginning we were limiting our mandate to talk only about the situation in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, West Bank including East Jerusalem, which Israel occupied in 1967. The legal definition in international law of belligerent occupation is that it's something temporary. And this is just a not normal situation which needs to end. In this time, there's a suspension of civil rights of the people that are controlled by the military, of the power that occupy the area, but the normal situation is self-rule, self-determination, and that the occupation needs to end, and therefore it has a set of limitations that Israel broke. For example, by building the settlements and moving its own citizens into the occupied area. So when B Tselem was first established, we were really focused on that, and other issues that are human rights issue, like collective punishment, administrative detentions, unlawful raids on homes, restrictions of movements, etc., etc., etc. And there's a wide plethora of violations of human rights that were happening. But the logic was that this is something that is going to end. I think now we're in the 54 years of the occupation, after generations of people that were born into it, and after Israel, quite frankly, declaring that it's not seeing it as something that needs to end, it became rather absurd to continue and to talk about something which doesn't even follow the rules of what it's supposed to mean. So when Israel makes the occupation just something that serves its own purpose to explain why Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip are controlled by the Israeli army, but has no intention of ever ending this situation, then we need to look for a different paradigm and a different description. So for many years, we were starting to talk about illegal occupation or one-state reality, but we felt that this is not enough. And then we shifted our gaze to look also to what happens within Israel. And what we saw is that actually there is a logic to what happens. And the logic is a logic of racial discrimination of a sort. The regime is perpetuating and trying to entrench the control of Jews over Palestinians. And it does so in four main areas which we analyzed in our paper. It's available. There's also a very short illustrated explainer on our website. In the HTTP is this is apartheid.betselem.org. And what we're seeing is, first, the fragmentation of the Palestinian population into different subgroups. In each of those areas where this population resides, they have less rights. They are beneath the Jews that are residing in that area. So if we're talking about Gaza, Palestinians in Gaza are essentially living in the largest open-air prison on the face of the earth. They are totally denied freedom of movement. They are restricted in moving in, moving out. Also, merchandise is restricted. And from time to time, like we had in last May, there's also an escalation of violence and tension in which Israel is bombing them from above where they have nowhere to go. In East Jerusalem, which Israel annexed in 1967, Palestinians receive residency status, which can be revoked, but it's not equal to citizenship. They cannot vote for the Israeli parliamentary elections. And also in East Jerusalem, there is a continued and concerted state effort to drive them out of their neighborhoods and to Judaize them, to take over their property and to hand it over to Jewish settlers. West Bank, Palestinians have a little bit more freedom of movement than Palestinians in Gaza, but also an array of roadblocks, restriction of movement within different parts. They have to deal with having different roads that are sometimes blocked for them. And of course, there's also severe restrictions in civil rights and freedom of political freedoms. And within Israel proper, which kind of, the most privileged Palestinians that live under Israeli rule are the ones that live within the borders of 48. They can vote to the Knesset, but since they're a minority and they are disconnected, fragmented from other Palestinians, they have political power or political strength, but it's ineffective political strength and doesn't really represent their full potential. And in addition to that, they are delegitimized. Basically, in the past years, Arabs within, or Palestinians within Israeli society are not equal citizens. They don't receive the same perks from the government. They don't receive the same allocations of budget. And like Anna said before, like Anna mentioned, this was also given a constitutional standing when Israel legislated the nation-state law and declared that Palestinians are second-grade citizens within Israel. So after making this analysis, we felt that, okay, we cannot unsee what we're seeing and we have to declare it as such. We didn't go the legal route. We thought that there's no need for that. Most people, our organization is not a legal one. We're more effective when we're doing advocacy, and we thought that other organizations which are more legal-minded can do the analysis of the crime of apartheid. We concentrated really on proving that there's one regime operating with the same logic, and to show examples that show how land is appropriate within Israel and in the occupied area from Palestinians to the hands of Jews, how Palestinians never get the same status and receive the same equal rights in all those areas, how Jews have a freedom of movement, Palestinians do not have that, how Jews, even if they are not citizens of Israel, they can come to Israel and they can become citizens of the state of Israel, whereas Palestinians who were born or have like a first family connection and to people that live in Israel or in areas under Israel control cannot come back and cannot receive a legal status within those areas. In some cases, they cannot even come and visit. So this is just like in a nutshell, the sum up of my presentation. I would like to add at the end to address the current situation. I mean, Anna here was designated just a few days ago as a member of a terrorist organization. This is, of course, ridiculous, ludicrous, outrageous, and horrible. Israel has sweeping ability to destroy Palestinian lives. And this declaration, something that was not said, but it's important to stress, is something that cannot be really contested in Israeli courts. The Minister of Defense declaration was based upon materials that is classified. And I think everybody here understands that you can't defend yourself or refute a charge which is classified, because you let's say the police says that you did the crime at a certain point at a certain time. If you don't know the certain time and the certain point and the certain crime, you can't bring an alibi or prove that you weren't there. So the case is that in fact, since there's the security justification, those allegations cannot be refuted in Israeli courts. And unless there is strong international pressure on Israel to change this course, this is a death blow to Palestinian civil society. Al-Haq is really like among the most important actors in Palestinian civil society, and also other organizations that were designated. And we are extremely worried that the international community is very complacent about this issue, which just proves it's really like Israel is banking on that. We are sure that if the ambassadors would be called back for discussions in their capitals, then the Israeli government might do a different calculation and reverse course. But if that doesn't happen, Israel will get its way, and we will be facing a very, very dire situation, because on top of having all the difficulties of living under the occupation, Palestinian voices that document and publish the violations will be silenced forever. Thank you.
Thank you, Roy. And I will bring Anna into the stream now as well. So thank you both for very good and detailed presentations. I mean, I think you have some really good points, and I think as a person working abroad with the question of apartheid in Palestine and against Palestinians, the crime of apartheid against the Palestinian society, I think what you said, Anna, about the fragmentation is such an important theme, because we tend to react all the time to what's going on. So now we're reacting to this classification of Al-Haq and the other organizations as terrorist organizations, and then we have to do something about that, and then all of a sudden we have to react about something else. And this is why I think the term apartheid is so important to get people to acknowledge that this is an apartheid regime, because that encompasses everything, and then we can talk about everything as an apartheid regime. And also, I think just the term and the connotations of apartheid. I mean, in Norway, we have a lot of people supporting Israel, but we don't have. I don't think any one of those would support apartheid. So getting this term as a normal term, and a term that's acknowledged by I mean, state and governments and international organizations around the world, I would believe is crucial. Like you said, Roy, if nothing happens now, when this happens, like so many things, I mean, just yesterday as well, they decided 1,300 new settlement units on Palestinian lands. So I'm trying to get to a question here, because because there's I feel like a growing frustration about this, and I wonder if you have any thoughts about how we can shift our focus from reacting on whatever is happening until to change that discourse into talking about apartheid, and how do we do that? How do we go about not being so reactive but being proactive and changing the focus of our solidarity work?
Okay, I don't think that people that are actors in civil society can dictate reality. I'm sorry, but this is like we are not decision makers, and we don't have the power, and we have to acknowledge that. That said, we do have influence and we do have power, and we cannot see the context of the designation of 6 Palestinian leading actors in civil society as terrorist organization detached from shifting in the narrative surrounding the issue of Israel and Palestine. So, in fact, we can also interpret it as an Israeli, really like outrageous, mad, very, very extreme reaction to the success of human rights organizations, and specifically to 3 organizations that were pivotal in opening the investigation in The Hague about crimes that Israel perpetrated in Gaza and in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. So it's not just they were not just targeted for the sake of targeting them. They were also targeted because they had influence over reality. And the other issue, I think, is actually apartheid. This is shifting the conversation about the only democracy in the Middle East. Israel really enjoyed all the perks of being considered to be a democracy, despite having the occupation alongside it for many, many years. And in that respect, I think that analyzing it as one regime in which only a certain type of people get full rights and others are always inferior to them is also changing the narrative and also changing the actions. And once this is more a wider held description in European capitals and in the United States, Israel will not be able to have the same level of acceptance and legitimacy and the freedom to do as it wills, and it will be forced to change the policy and to end it. So it's not just we're not just reactive. We're doing what we can with the tools that we have, not being decision makers or politicians.
Thank you, Roy. Anna, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, I'm reading also the interesting question on the side, but I guess that it's. I agree with Roy that we are not the only. We are not the one who are creating the context we are living in, but of course we can influence that, and we should be part of it and be engaged with it. Apartheid and human rights discourse is not everything what we can say about Palestine or Palestinian would say about their own place and their people, but it's very much helpful to acknowledge many aspects of the situation, and like you said, in a wholesome, in a very much more comprehensive aspect. And what's the most important, and what I was trying to show, it's a crime against humanity. It has its gravity, and it's finally shows also the violations which Palestinians suffers every day in a wider context, and not distinct from the historical context and from the different parts of their community. I think what's the most important with this discussion, and I also saw the question about how someone from abroad can support and why we are hopeful while this discussion is happening. And it's very challenging because, of course, as always, within the academic discourse or legal discourse, there will be different voices focusing on different aspects. Also, sometimes even they are touched from the people themselves, who just suffer an immense, sometimes a horrid situation in their life, and theoretical debates doesn't really make their life better. But of course, it has its role, and everyone has its role to play. So it depends on, and more and more, and especially in this year, I think we see how important it is to challenge the narrative, which allows one side to dictate how we describe the situation. And this is what we are dealing with. Putting apartheid in the center and showing it as such, and analyzing and calling it all together by international Israeli-Palestinian organization and many different voices from established in the field, seeing very similar logic of this racial discrimination, is that allow us to come together and maybe to create a more effective movement towards and it's not for us as a human rights organization to create political future or a political idea how this is supposed to be. What's the most important from this analysis comes that we should start to recognize the right of self-determination of Palestinians. What does it mean? This means that they know and they should be able to figure it out by themselves. It's not for the international actors or UN or us to tell them how they should proceed with their statehood, with their society, with their reforms or their authorities. They should be able, as everyone and every people on the planet, to, like we agreed, that have the self-determination and discuss it. In the situation of belligerent occupation, blockade, fragmentation, it was simply very not possible, actually. And judging the results and the situation and blaming both parts as a part of the same conflict is just unjust and not acknowledging the core of the situation when we have an oppression and asymmetry between those sides.
Totally agree, Anna. Thank you. I would just like to ask you one more question each before we can start looking at the questions that people asked in the comments. And I have one for you, Anna, and one for you, Roy. I'll go first with you, Anna. I was just wondering, to go back to the beginning of your presentation, talking about the fact that Al-Haq has now been declared a terrorist organization. Can you just say a little bit about how that affects your possibility to work, like in both in like practical and terms, and also in like political terms. And then after that, Roy, I was just wanting to ask you about how have the Israeli society reacted to the B Tselem description of using the word apartheid. So if you go first, Anna, and then Roy afterwards.
So yeah, like you in your question, there are several different impacts of this. Of course, we also want to acknowledge that this is not the first time we're going through like certain types of attacks. And of course, now we are practical results is that actually it did succeed to, you know, for a while or for this couple of days to take our focus from the other planned work we had for this year, and we have plenty to deal with, and focus on this absurd allegations. And we need to answer different questions which we should not even been asked. So that's of course a practical aspect. Also a practical aspect is, like I said, that this anti-terrorism law, which was established in 2016, we will be probably publishing some more in-depth analysis of that, how much unjust and unlawful this law is, and this is what we should point it out. We don't need to. That's why we don't want to. There is no like proven allegation actually in this designation, so we cannot really even answer to them, and we would not, because the law itself is unlawful in its designation and how it's create the system, the systematic witch hunting basically of anyone who dare to criticize government and we've seen this in different regimes, and we've seen that before established by different regimes, and the organization were always in a focus of that. And what it's prescribed in this law that actually it gives Israel power to seize the activities of the organization, close basically organization, and arbitrarily arrest its employee and management and leadership. So it's put a huge danger on directly people who are human rights defenders and close and can or attempt to stop vital work in a human rights field. We hope that, like we see from the amazing, and this is what I want to not forget to mention, an immense solidarity we received since this 3 days, including Lois organization, like all of our partners, as well political, some states start to talk about this, that they don't recognize this decision as a lawful. So what we hope is that actually this pressure will on Israel will be affected to the point that they will revoke, and this is what we are asking for, to revoke this decision as unlawful without even going into that much of debate over the absurd allegation, which are, by the way, seized by the security reasons, like it usually is.
Thank you, Anna. We are also working on getting the Norwegian foreign minister to make a statement about this incredible, stupid declaration of you as a terrorist organization. So we will definitely try to get Norway at least to do something. So we'll see. But yeah, Roy, about the Israeli response to you calling it apartheid.
So we actually have data point because a month after our publication, we did a survey within Palestine and within Israeli society. So I will give you the numbers. But first, I would like to say that it was, we didn't expect everybody to say immediately, yes, you are totally right, this is correct. It was especially difficult for people that we'd consider to be closer to us, from circles that were more favorable or within the Israeli progressive movements that were sort of stunned by it. But the truth-saying factor was very critical here, and the more people wrote about it and engaged with it, they found it more and more difficult to refute things that were written there. Everything was very fact-based and carefully worded. So it's not like we were just like making a political speech. That was really like a meticulous research of the situation and the description of it, which really like shows what goes on, and it's very difficult to to deny reality. And in fact, following that, after a month, we conducted a survey of the entire people that reside between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. The Palestinian part was surveyed by Dr. Khalil Shikaki, and the Israeli/Jewish side was conducted by Dr. Dalia Scheinlin. And I think you won't be surprised when you hear that most Palestinians think that the situation is akin to apartheid, and that most Jews think that it's not. However, there is 25% of the Jewish population that thinks that it is akin to apartheid, which I think after 1 month after publication of something which is rather, not the usual thing that the usual diet that people expect from Israeli human rights organization, that was kind of surprisingly good. We don't expect people that were educated in Israel and were really grew up with the narrative that the schools here are teaching, to be so critical of their own regime and able to see through a lot of the lies and misguidance that people are usually subjected to. And we think that this is it's not a majority, but it's a good start. And it's not only if we want to make progress here, then it's not only about what Israeli tell themselves, it's also about what the world is telling Israel. So if more people around the world will point and say, this is unjust, this is unfair, and this is Jewish supremacy, this is a regime that is working just for Jews and is trying to disenfranchise Palestinians, then Israelis will have to also admit to the situation and hopefully change it.
Definitely. And I read another survey. I can't remember. I thought I'd written down the numbers here, but it was in America with the American Jews, and I think 22% acknowledged that Israel was conducting the crime of apartheid. And if you look at the younger part of the population, it was even higher. I think it was almost up to 30%.
Yeah.
And of course, this discourse has to change all around the world, also here in Norway. But thank you very much, guys. I'm trying to look through the questions here. There's a lot of greetings from Palestine and Gaza, and greetings from Beirut, and people supporting the Palestinian freedom struggle. There's Eddie White here has a question. He says, "What would you advise people abroad to do? How can they best show their support at this time?"
Well, at this time, contact your representative, your parliament member, your congress member, whatever type of representative you have, and demand them to ask the difficult question about how is it acceptable that Israel is designating human rights defenders as terrorists, and what is your government going to do about that?
Good answer. Anna?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would even say that in whatever power, like I assume that there are different people here working for maybe civil society or being involved as just citizens or writers, academics. So in general, in this regard of apartheid, it's not a coincidence I started from the question or theme of discourse, because what we keep saying, and what just Roy said with those about this surveys, that it seems that it's all about the language, and very much it is about how we describe the situation, because if we are just keep describing it in a way that it doesn't really show a really solid and good solution, then we are describing it wrong. And also, so basically, speak up, and if you really want to know more, follow our websites and our partners who explain it more. I think that more and more people involved and showing their solidarity through well-informed and also informed by Palestinian themselves and Palestinian research that shows Palestinian history and the struggle, not only through the lenses of mainstreamed and very often censored work and education, and very often what we are seeing in the media or in the diplomatic sources, some description and language and how we describe the situation, and how this fragmentation, which is, like I said, a method of the regime being maintained, how this fragmentation in dealing with Palestinian as a separate domains, dealing with the very singular aspects of this regime without looking at the broader picture. That's all. I'm not saying that it's all wrong, because we should see those details. It's about seeing also the bigger context and seeing it in a colonial and settler colonial aspects context. And I think that apartheid allowed for it. And there is more and more growing research. And I think it's something that it's still novel. So whoever is actually informed should spread the word, and being brave enough to engage in a discussion. So I think that the speaking up part and influencing the way how we approach this matter, that it's not conflict when there are two sides who are just equally fighting over something and have the same powers, because it's not. I'm not saying that there is no violation or there is a perfect word in the Palestinian side, but when we are what the apartheid framework present, that there is this regime which affects every aspect of life, also the way how decision making is done, also how the political regime, Palestinian regime, is acting with their own people, and how, for example, civil society works. Because I'm sure that there is a lot of people who would prefer to focus on another amazing aspect of social work, not only on human rights violation. This is not all what we can say about Palestine, and we should remember that whenever we think of that, and about our solidarity, and to center in any solidarity movement, to center the Palestinian voice and to center the right to self-determination. It's not for us to designate what's better solution for them, what's better solution for the situation. It's now is the moment to start to giving back this right to those who are oppressed, and for them to make the decision on their own, the same way how every country and state and people were able to do in history.
Definitely. Thank you very much, Anna. I couldn't agree more. And I guess this is part of it, talking about apartheid and spreading the word and spreading the information about. I think a lot of people think using the word apartheid is a bit scary because it has this strong connotations towards South Africa, and then when you apply it as the legal framework, people aren't very familiar with it. So talking about it and spreading it and spreading information about it is detrimental, of course. I have one more question here, and then I think we'll wrap it up. But it's from Line. She says, do you have any hopes that the Biden administration will develop a more progressive approach to the Palestine-Israel issue? So you mentioned that it has to come from within, but the pressure has to come from the outside. Do we have any hopes at all from the Biden administration? Anna?
Well, actually, it's an interesting question. Thanks for that. We were looking at the Biden administration already with some hope due to their commitment to going back to human rights approach in their foreign policies. As we know, we came out from the Trump era when the human rights were almost something which was thrown out from the glossary of American foreign politics. But let's not forget that the foreign American politics is also the part that Israel is the most important allies in the region, and this hasn't changed. So, but we, for example, at some point appealed for Biden to change their attitude toward the investigation in the International Criminal Court, and it didn't happen. It didn't really happen, nothing in terms of decision of moving American embassy to Jerusalem, which was very controversial, even in US, a move, and was totally against the right of self-determination of Palestinians and Palestinians living in Jerusalem. Thirdly, there was several decisions which were not revoked by the Biden administration. So it doesn't really show the direction. It's more rhetorics, which was applied because in other parts of the world, it's easier to change different decision or like to proceed with a human rights approach. But in terms of Palestine, it never been human rights or rights approach. For sure, it was not a right to self-determination approach. It's definitely still dedicated by blind, almost blind support for any Israeli government and their decision. Although we've seen the reaction to the designation against us, that American administration wasn't happy about that, and they were not happy that they were not that they were not informed about this prior, which shows how huge impacts they think they have or they should have. So it's interesting development in that regard. And but I don't know if we can consider it in terms of hopes. Like administration, it's in the end 4 years long-term governments, which will not lost almost first year on doing basically nothing for Palestinian people, apart of few declaration of changing the situation.
Thanks, Anna.
So
Roy, you have
I'm not
anything?
very hopeful.
Not very hopeful.
I have little hope for the Biden administration. I have much bigger hope for American society. I do see trends changing in the United States. As you mentioned before, American Jews are looking at the situation differently. They are not giving blind support to Israel and not writing blank checks anymore. They're much more critical thinking. American progressive movement is much more committed to racial justice and to decolonization. And I think that there is a lot of hope to draw from that. I'm not sure that the Biden administration will be the one to express all those changing trends, but I'm sure they will be in the future more politically effective in shifting the policy that comes out of DC.
Let's hope so. Okay, on that note, I think we will say thank you very much for participating in this meeting. It's been really interesting. I'm sure that people will pay attention to the situation, especially now with Al-Haq and the other organizations, and also we will do whatever we can here in Norway to lobby our government to act. We just had an election, and we have a much more progressive government than we had a while ago, but still we have some way to go. So, but we're still working and trying to get some influence on how they're reacting to Israel's apartheid regime in Palestine. But thank you so much, Anna. And thank you very much, Roy, for giving us your time and your thoughts and your knowledge. I'm going to say some stuff in Norwegian now to finish off the meeting, but thank you very much, guys.
Cheers.
Thank you so much for having us.
Ok. Folkens, tusen takk for at dere var med på nok et møte. Håper at dere fikk god informasjon og svar på noen av spørsmålene dere eventuelt hadde. Husk at apartheid internasjonal lov, som tydelig definert, og man kan bruke det i argumentasjonen når man snakker om det. Ikke vær redd for å snakke om apartheid i Palestina. Og så vil jeg bare minne om at nå det mulig å melde seg inn i Palestinakomiteen. Det koster 100 kroner første året du medlem, og hvis du melder deg inn nå, så får du muligheten til å få et helt år, altså hele 2022, for den samme summen. Så ikke nøl med å melde dere inn i Palestinakomiteen, folkens. Så vil jeg til slutt minne om vår kampanje som heter Apartheidfrie soner. Det en kampanje der vi ber organisasjoner, bedrifter, butikker, organisasjoner om å erklære seg som en apartheidfri zone. Hvis du erklærer deg som en apartheidfri zone, så sier du at du ikke skal handle, kjøpe eller selge israelske varer eller produkter som bidrar til okkupasjonen, at du ikke skal samarbeide med israelske organisasjoner som bidrar til okkupasjonen, og at du offisielt erklærer deg som en apartheidfri zone, slik at man har muligheten til å gå inn på Palestinakomiteen sine nettsider og se hvor mange apartheidfrie zoner det finnes i byen sin. Så jeg oppfordrer alle som ser på nå, hvis dere kjenner noen som har en butikk, eller en kiosk, eller en bedrift, eller leder en organisasjon, eller et eller annet, hør om de har lyst til å bli en apartheidfri zone. Dere finner mer informasjon om den kampanjen på palestinakomiteen.no. Og ikke glem å melde dere inn. Og så kommer vi tilbake igjen med månedens møte med Morten. Siste mandagen i måneden, hver måned. Så neste møte blir 29. november. Det den internasjonale dagen for solidaritet med det palestinske folket. Så da håper jeg at vi ses da. Tusen takk for i kveld, folkens. Og ha en fortsatt fin mandagskveld. Ha det bra.